So now for our featured speaker, Terry Moran.
All right, well, I'm so happy to be back with you all here, and to be back in the Lawrence community. I'm going to tap into what I think is one of the essential aspects of being a Laurentian as we talk about the very fraught subject of the presidential election this year, and that aspect is our earnestness. I think one of the things that I love about having gone to Lawrence and having reconnected in my middle years with Lawrence and now being a participant in Bjorklunden and I hope in other areas as well, is that same genuine spirit of inquiry that Lawrence gave to me, I think is still very much alive. And Lord knows we need it when talking about politics in this year. I hope everyone is doing well, is healthy and well as much as we can be in this very bizarre year. That includes not just a pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in more than a century, but also this great reckoning on the fundamental issue in American history, in my judgment, which is justice across the boundaries of race and gender and so many other ways. Black Lives Matter bring that once again sort of front and center to the political agenda. I think those are the two big issues in this campaign. The pandemic and the president's performance on it, and the protests surrounding the full human dignity and civic equality of our Black brothers and sisters in this country. And I think that's really an incredibly dramatic moment in our history. It's fraught, though, as I say. It's so many people are wound up tight as a drum about it, for a very good reason. There's a lot at stake. So what I want to do today is give you an overview, a sort of typical pundit overview, if you will, on where the race is and where I think it's going and why, and then really delve into the two big issues, more briefly on the pandemic and more profoundly on the issue of race and where we are as a country on that and what this election holds for us. So first, let's just talk a little bit about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. The conventional wisdom in an election like this, incumbent president running for re-election, is that it is a performance review on the president in office, that it's a judgment of his record and how he's doing for each and every voter, what they think of their lives, how their lives are going, and what they credit or discredit the president for. And so what typically is done is people look at the president's approval ratings, they look at the right track, wrong track numbers, and those are very, very relevant, certainly. They aren't great. We can, if I can summon this up, and I think I can summon up the state of the race just by virtue of, here is the Real Clear Politics. If you can see that, this is the Real Clear Politics poll of polls. It's essentially their average. It's a rather crude measure, but this is over the course of the last 10 months or so. You can see Donald Trump is the red line and Joe Biden is the blue line. Biden holds at this point about a 7-point lead. I think most people feel that is going to narrow, as it naturally does in any race, and that there's this whole school of thought that there's shy Trump voters. There are people who won't tell pollsters that they're voting for Trump because it's socially disfavored, makes them feel embarrassed a little bit, but they'll go out and vote for him. There's a lot of debate in political science circles and polling circles whether or not that happens. It seems like it's likely, but a 7 to 9 point lead, which is probably where Biden is, that's substantial enough to say comfortably he's winning right now. My own feeling is that those traditional ways of looking at an incumbent president running for re-election, what's his approval number? What's the right track, wrong track number? Don't work as well right now, and Donald Trump knows it. He's a very good politician for this particular moment, because what's driving people today is, I put it this way rather pointedly, it's not what policy are you for? What plan for the government do you support? It's who do you hate? It's what the political scientists call negative affiliation. We've divided ourselves into these very, very bitterly opposite tribes. And the old notion that a candidate would run to his or her base during the primaries and then run to the center to get the votes in the center in the general election, I think has less import today. That's certainly the bet that Donald Trump made in 2016 and won. He sensed that the country was cleaved along lines of demographics and generations and race, certainly. And he, instead of, it's one of the things that was so shocking about him. You could see Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and all the others up there on the debate stage in 2016 kind of try to play to the base in the traditional way, knowing that they'd have to attack back, and Trump would just blow that down and just say, the Mexicans, they're sending us rapists and criminals and some good people, I suppose. And everybody was shocked, but he knew exactly what he was doing, I believe, in that he was essentially, somebody compared him to like gang tattoos. He was covering his face and neck with the signal, I'm with you, it's okay, we're gonna win this. That he was essentially signaling, I am not going to yield to that mushy centrism. I am your implacable instrument of destruction. I am your weapon against the elites and the changes in the country that you don't like. And I'm not gonna budge back to the middle. And it won. And I think he crystallized in his movement confirmation that's the way to win. Joe Biden's a much more traditional politician. He's a politician who's, a Democrat, centrist, leftist, not leftist, but he's liberal Democrat is I think what one would call him. Although, as his running mate pointed out in debate when she popped him on the issue of busing, he hasn't always been a liberal Democrat on many issues. But his natural inclination is to reach for consensus. He was in the Senate for 30 years, known as being an effective senator in that way. And I actually think there's something more important that's different about Joe Biden than about Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or John Kerry or many previous Democratic candidates. And in some ways, it comes back to college. Joe Biden would be the first president elected, if he wins, to have attended a state college or university since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. Biden went to the University of Delaware and then to Syracuse Law School. And if you look at where the Democrats have been coming from, right, Obama went to Pomona and Columbia and Harvard, and Hillary Clinton went to Wellesley and Yale, and John Kerry went to Harvard, and Clinton went to Georgetown and Yale, and back and back and back. And the relevance of that, I believe, is that the Democrats' candidates, very, very skilled candidates. I mean, Barack Obama is one of only 7 presidents in our history to have won election to the presidency twice with more than half the vote. 7 of the 45 presidents, he's one of them. So he's an excellent politician. Bill Clinton, an excellent politician, but they were wonky, kind of cerebral, right? But very good at explaining things from that perspective. And Joe Biden's not that. He's a very different kind of politician. He's much more traditional, whereas the kind of wonky, policy-driven politician might approach voters in the style of, here's what I'm going to do for you, here's the plans that I have for you. Biden is much more of a traditional politician, and his first question is, what do you need? What do you need in your life? And I think I can make a deal and find a way to get that thing done. It squares with what I'm interested in, and it's a totally different conversation. I think there were a lot of voters who felt talked down to by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Less so Bill Clinton, because he was the political talent of a generation. But Biden brings a different approach. So we're seeing a clash in an operational way, in a strategy way, of Trump doubling down on his base and saying, I can win it this way. And Joe Biden saying, you know, let's restore a sense of normalcy to our politics. You know me, I'm Joe. I'm not going to defund the police. I'm not all about radical plans. I believe we can do this together. He's a sort of cheerleader for a generally liberal program, but one that I think he believes he can get Republicans on board, as he did in many years in the United States Senate. The question is, has the country changed so much that at 77 years old, he's a relic politically, not just physically or mentally, as the Republicans say, but that he doesn't get it. And that Trump, even though he's 74, does, that he's a much more contemporary figure. That's one of the questions we're going to find out. But to move to the two big issues, he is the incumbent president of the United States. Americans are, I believe, still a pragmatic people. There are people who, you know, we like what works, right? We don't have these ancient ideological loyalties that France does, for example, or Spain or Britain. I lived in London for several years and covered these elections, where for the most part, Americans, you know, you do the job, you get rewarded. If you don't do the job, we fire you. That is changing under the pressure of these other issues that I'd like to talk about. But on the performance of this president, well, I guess he was doing pretty well, although most people said they had an unfavorable view of him and disapproved of his job in office. But he was, you know, somewhere where he was when he won the presidency, mid-40s, a little under. He's cratered since the pandemic because it is fair to say he screwed it up. He has a terrible record on this pandemic. The United States has 5% of the world's population. We have more than 20% of the world's deaths from COVID. And the rest of the world is getting on top of this, at least our peer countries, from Germany to Japan and South Korea and New Zealand and Canada, which is a totally different coronavirus experience than we do, because they recognized right away the importance, they listened to the epidemiologists who knew the importance of testing and tracking. Test, 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 find out who the infected were in contact with, and get on top of it that way. Trump early on wanted very little to do with testing. It's not the kind of thing he likes. He said it should be the governor's responsibility. That's where the labs are. He's now actively, his CDC is actively trying to decrease testing. He said we shouldn't test so much. We wouldn't have so many cases. You'd still have hospitalizations and deaths, and probably more, because the virus doesn't care if you test it or not. I mean, the math on this has been simple from the beginning, right? We all know it. There's a new disease in the human species, and it doesn't care. It doesn't care what protest you're at, what side of this great divide you're on. It doesn't care, you know, if you test or you don't test. We're all have no natural, very little natural immunity to it, and it kills a certain segment of people who we haven't completely figured out yet. I think that's enough for most people to take a serious view of it, and a serious view of the president, who, when this national problem arrived, tried to punt to the states on some of the crucial issues. And the polls show overwhelmingly big, even many Republicans recognize that Donald Trump has done a bad job. And you can try and spin it, but he's done a bad job in the pandemic. And I think that is the most old-fashioned, if you will, part of the election dynamic, which is that he will be judged on his performance as the president of the pandemic. Now, will he be rescued by a vaccine? I guarantee he's going to announce one before the election. It looks like the Oxford vaccine that's being developed, along with AstraZeneca, is going to have some preliminary results before the election. And Trump has suggested he'll request an emergency use authorization to use it in the United States so that he can say, look, we got the vaccine. And nobody's going to stop him. So that he'll probably do that, and that may certainly help. But at that point, we're likely to be well over 200,000, probably closer to 250,000 Americans dead. And our poor performance in comparison with every other country of our status, our wealth, and our really robust healthcare system, which doesn't work equitably, but which is very strong, will be seen as a real problem for the president. Now, the other issue is the one where I'm going to call on your patience and on our spirit of Laurentian inquiry, because it's the most intractable problem in our country's history, isn't it? It's the original sin, right? We made this tremendous, revolutionary, still radical promise to ourselves on the founding day of our country, our pledge that in our nation we would recognize all are created equal, except that the guy who wrote those words owned some people, including the mother of his children. And that conflict, born there, now has erupted again in this incredibly intense way. And this is, this is really what's changed things in many ways. We can see, week by awful week, it seems, the killing under the color of law in horrific ways of our Black brothers and sisters in America. And that has awakened the nation, and younger people in particular. My daughter, I'm a proud parent of a Lawrence graduate. She's class of 2018. And she's out there, and there's just a level of intensity. And I must say, I said it on the air at one point on ABC News, that I stand before her and these young people ashamed in some ways of the job my generation did. Yeah, we're better off in many ways, but come on. How far down the field did we get the ball? In what is the fundamental assignment that we gave ourselves in the Declaration of Independence? I think that's the issue, and it is dividing. Although there is considerable hope in it. I think you do see large majorities at the beginning of the protests. We are now dividing them up, just as we did with the pandemic. I mean, one thing I should have mentioned about the pandemic is you'd think that would have been a unifying moment for our country. But we each saw it, it seemed, through the lens of our own partisan differences. Masks. I mean, look, I got my ABC News mask here. I should get a Lawrence mask. That became a partisan issue. Like the virus cared. It was sad and puzzling to the rest of the world. Took us down several notches in the esteem of the world to see us squabbling over just basic public health matters because I don't like your guy, or you don't like my guy, or I don't like where you come from, or whatever. People are willing to fight about it. And I think in the area of Black Lives Matter, there was this moment before we went to our corners, as we are now, where you could see in the polls very strong bipartisan majorities of Americans saying, yeah, we got to get on top of this too. It's time. It's time. We get it. We get it that Black Americans, our fellow citizens, are treated way disproportionately with violence and suspicion and injustice, bordering in places on tyranny. Go back and look at the Department of Justice report on what life was like in Ferguson, Missouri. Before that, the killing of Michael Brown, who was in an altercation with a police officer, triggered the riots there. That town was run as a tyranny, as a racial tyranny. And had he not been killed, it would still be that way. It was quite shocking the way it was done there. So for a large bipartisan majority of Americans, there was a recognition that, yes, the killing of George Floyd, watching that man's life be extinguished, looking at the look on the police officer's face as he crushed his neck. I just think, the basic decency and common sense, the American people came out, and there were large majorities saying, yeah, let's do something about it. Now it does look like we're dividing into camps. And why is that? Well, I do think that demographics has something to do with it, not just race along black and white line, the color line, as it was once called. But we're a different country, and I want to go to another chart, which I've used sometimes in my Bjorklunden seminars. And this is about immigration, about who we are as a country in terms of our general makeup. Roughly, it tracks what you might call, I don't want to call it the decline of white America, but the let's put it the increasing diversity in America, I think is the way to say it. But just take a look. So I'm going to go and grab a photograph here of, all right, so this, which I hope you can see, can I make it bigger? I can. So this is the share of people living in the United States, of Americans, who were not born in the United States of America, from 1850 to just about the present day. And if you see that there were, from the mid-19th century towards the end of the 19th century, where it reached an all-time high of just about 15% of foreign-born Americans. That was the era in the late 19th, early 20th century of the mass immigration. First, from Ireland and other places, and then from Eastern Europe, from Poland and Russia, and from Southern Europe, from Greece and Italy, the Godfather era. Think of those movies, the Lower East Side of New York City. And what happened? Look at it, collapsed, because in 1922, amid very similar kinds of concerns that we hear today, there was an outcry about the danger that these foreign people brought to our shores, the danger of their political beliefs, anarchism. There was some violence. There was the era of the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. There was a concern that they wouldn't learn English, that they were bringing diseases and different traditions, different faiths. There was a great eruption of anti-Catholicism at that time. In the 1920 election, I believe it was it 20 or 24 that Alfred E. Smith ran on the Democratic ticket? It would have been 1920 because Franklin Roosevelt was his vice presidential candidate. And the Democratic Party was accused by the Republicans of being the party of Romanism, and rebellion. And that was touching on all the drunken Irishmen, the Catholics that were coming around, and the danger of anarchy and these wild-eyed labor movement types that were disproportionately immigration. So 1922, and that's the cliff there. We passed the most restrictive immigration law in our country's history. And the percentage of foreign-born population plunged to under 5% in the census of 1970. And if you look at, and I don't have it at the moment, and if you see at the end now, it's going back up, it's back about 15%, all-time high again. So if you look at what the distribution of foreign-born Americans was, state by state in 1970 at its lowest point, there were a lot in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and various other, Philadelphia, big cities like that. Many states had under 1% of the population of many states in the United States in 1970 had fewer than 1% of its population born outside the United States. You couldn't find somebody who wasn't born out. I mean, I grew up outside of Chicago, but the only immigrant that I knew was the nice German lady who had married the World War II soldier down the street, and Mrs. Schroeder, and she was the only person I knew who wasn't born in the United States. So, and the reason I bring all this up in the context of our racial divide is because most Americans grew up in an all-white America. That's basically what it was. And most Americans of a certain age, I should say, of Donald Trump's age, certainly, and of people down to really the big immigration, the 60 million plus, didn't really kick in into the late 70s. So it really wasn't until about 1990 that you were really getting, late 80s, early 90s, that you're really getting a palpable difference in American communities. And my point is, that's hard for some people. That's hard. It's a different, as it was in the 1920s, it's different. It's a different culture. It's a different field. I've heard people say, I was in Pennsylvania, in Old Forge, Pennsylvania last weekend outside of Scranton, up in the Wyoming Valley, where the president was. He held a rally and I went up there I didn't go in, but I mean, I did talk to people outside. And somebody said, we don't even know who we are anymore. And that sense of a loss of identity, I think, is very, very key in the Trump coalition. And you match that now with going back to our ancient challenge, which is the challenge across the racial line. And the fear of loss of status, not knowing who we are, that's very, very genuine. And Trump certainly plays on it. It's the reason this election, I believe, and please, I'm going to open it up for questions in a minute, is so intense. Both sides say America itself is at stake. And people volunteered this to me outside the Trump rally, that they felt that there won't be an America if Trump doesn't win. And many people who will be voting for Joe Biden feel the exact same way. And that's because most elections are about, what should we do? Here are the problems in society. What should we do next to solve them, make our country better? This election is about, who are we? Make America Great Again, the Donald Trump vision offers one vision. It is to return to the glory days, to the halcyon days of an America that was more rooted in traditional faith structures, more rooted in a local economy, more localized economies, and less demographically diverse, and less diverse in terms of moral outlooks, lifestyles. And the Democratic Party looks to a different America, one that is much more demographically diverse, one that has embraced a kind of globalized economic order, which knows no, knowledge-based economy knows no borders, and one that is very comfortable with all kinds of lifestyles, life choices, and outlooks. And they just feel irreconcilable. And in some ways they are, which means, the great fear is what if we have a contested election? We don't even trust public health officials from the other side, to say nothing of who's counting our ballots. So if we end up with a contested election, it's going to be very difficult indeed. I thought when Kyle Rittenhouse went from Antioch, Illinois, up to Kenosha with his long gun and ended up killing 2 people, now charged with homicide, I must say, I thought I could envision a situation where if there was a contested outcome in Wisconsin or Michigan or elsewhere, and it looked to people who vote for Donald Trump as if it was being stolen, I could see a lot of Kyle Rittenhouses. I mean, in some ways, they showed up at the Michigan State Capitol to protest. A lot of those people were law-abiding citizens, but they brought their long guns into the state capitol to make a point. So we're in a bad place right now. I'm going to end on a hopeful note, though, which is that one of the things that polls and social science and our own common sense tell us, that even in this time of negative affiliation, right, that we're divided into these tribes, and we will go with the guy even if we know he hasn't done a good job, or the other guy even if we know maybe he's lost a step, because we're much more intent on beating the other side than on coming together and winning for the country. As, oh, well, maybe the same thing. But these issues, there's not a straight line division. A lot of people who support Donald Trump also support national health insurance. A lot of people who support Donald Trump also support, I can't remember the name of it, it's Bernie Sanders' idea, it comes from Europe, where every publicly held company must by law have a representative of the workforce, of the employees on the board of directors. That's hugely popular. And on the other side, a lot of people who support Joe Biden are obviously, they're concerned about the violence in the streets, but a lot of them don't want their taxes raised, and a lot of them are also very concerned about China and the way that manufacturing jobs and other jobs have gone overseas to China. So the point is, we're still in there somewhere in our tribes. We are still in there with our diverse points of view. It depends on which issues get elevated. And Donald Trump came into office as somebody who had this instinct to elevate the issues that he knows he can ring the changes on. and win. And so those are the issues that are elevated right now. And these others where actually there is agreement kind of vanish. I do think it's a hinge election. Somebody said to me the other day, imagine if Beau Biden hadn't gotten cancer. Joe Biden, could he have beaten Donald Trump? I mean, Hillary Clinton did in the popular vote. Could Biden have won Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Florida? Maybe. So on such things, the world hinges. And my own feeling right now is state of the race, Biden has that slight edge. It's been ground down by the violence in some cities and by Trump's engagement. Look, right now, Biden being in the basement has allowed Trump to stumble through the pandemic and be the focus, but you got to take the presidency from an incumbent. And the debates will be critical in that regard. I expect him to do well. Well enough to win? I don't know. I felt pretty confident the last time that Donald Trump was going to win. I actually said that at Bjorklunden in August of 2016. I thought, yeah, I think Donald Trump's going to win. I don't know this time, but I'll let you tell me. I think that should be sufficient to get the conversation going.
Great. I'm going to start with a question that was submitted via email in advance. So it started with, are you surprised by the lack of integrity within the mainstream media? Seems that if there was just a little integrity, there might be a mad dash for the exits, a la Bari Weiss or Ariana Carey. Thoughts? Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great question. Look, when Trump was, when Trump was elected, I was living in Britain. They brought me back to help cover it, and I'd covered Brexit, so I could kind of feel what was coming here. I also thought he was just a better candidate, more skilled than Hillary Clinton. I thought she was not I could never figure out why she was running for president. I went to both conventions. I listened to Trump. I knew what he stood for. I listened to Hillary. I was like, I thought if she just stood up and said, I'm going to spend $1 billion on infrastructure for the 21st century, she'd be president today. Maybe not. I think I underestimated sexism and other things in that, but she was not a particularly good candidate. So then I went back to England and getting to the media. I was sitting in London and I was traveling around covering ISIS and the elections in Europe and the Great Migration crisis and all that other stuff, but watching CNN and stuff like that. And I was kind of, and ABC, and I was kind of amazed. I was like, why are they fighting with him? Why is every reporter in Washington fighting with him? Just cover him straight. I mean, I'm kind of amazed still that to this day, I've not heard anybody ask him. The president says he's got a great healthcare plan. He's been saying for 3.5 years, it's coming in 2 weeks. He doesn't have great health. He has no healthcare plan. None. I mean, he's got these little pieces, he's done this, done that. He calls that a great plan. But one of the things he absolutely says all the time is, I guarantee you, if you have pre-existing condition, you'll have coverage under my plan. The proper role of the media next is not to condemn him or attack him. The proper role of the media is to say, how? How? That's a hard thing to do. Please explain precisely how. And he can't. So the point is, if you cover him straight, I think you're doing your audiences a service, and you're also truly holding the president accountable. I think there was a lot of posturing in the media. Now, that said, Fox is worse. And the media, the conservative media ecosphere, basically, I mean, they were running pictures of fires that were 3 or 4 weeks old to try and keep up, before Kenosha, trying to keep up the notion that the world was falling apart. So I think for some reason, the ideal of just covering him straight and holding him accountable, which I think would hurt him because he likes the dirt, the fight, the accusations. He uses us as a prop. I've been to plenty of rallies where he points back at the rafters. He says, those guys are the worst people in America. And I'm like, yeah, they're terrible. And I actually think it doesn't matter to me what he or they think as long as I'm doing my job. So but there's a problem, which is that he lies, and he does. And, that I've covered a bunch of presidents, covered politics for a long time. I expect to get spun, But the one thing you really can't, there's nothing you can do. You can't engage somebody who's just telling you a lie. And I think that's one of the reasons. But I also just think a lot of it is posturing. And last point, we aren't diverse enough in the media. Not just in terms of race and gender and demographics, viewpoint diversity. You know, I asked my colleagues, I have 20, I said, how many people at ABC News voted for Donald Trump? I know secretly, because I'm kind of that guy who bugs people about that. People send me secret kind of emails saying, hey, thanks. It's a handful, and they don't want to say it. So I think there are significant problems in the media. I actually think the conservative ecosphere is worse, but there's plenty of blame to go around.
Okay, our next